Thursday, May 2nd, 2024. This is the Hermetic Hour. I'm your host, Poke Runyon, and tonight we will review the 1930 classic historical novel Salome, My First 2,000 Years of Love, by George Sylvester of Viereck and Paul Eldridge. Now, this is the second of a three-decker trilogy by Viereck and Eldridge, and may be called a fictional feminist manifesto. I'm going to qualify that by saying glamorous feminism, because its heroine, the immortal Princess Salome, used her charm and beauty in a constant battle against male domination, symbolized by her immortal lover and patriarchal nemesis, Cartaphilus, the wandering Jew. Now, these two sustain a love-hate relationship that spans the ages, as each of the two immortals struggle with their self-determined missions. Now, Salome wants female equality and even domination. She wants to conquer the curse of the moon. Salome supported and condoned medieval witchcraft and was considered a witch. She infiltrated the Roman Catholic Church and installed a female pope. Cartaphilus is determined to destroy Christianity because Jesus cursed him with immortality. And also he was jealous because Mary Magdalene was his girlfriend and she ran off with Jesus. Now, the metaphor of the Jewish diaspora is obvious in the case of Cartaphilus. Further disturbing symbolism is found in Cartaphilus' servant, Kotikokura. He is an African apeman who is described as the missing link between simians and humans. He becomes more and more human through the course of the three-volume trilogy. However, because he is African, we would be surprised if the third volume is reprinted. The first two books are available in recent editions, and original 1930s copies of Salome are still available. And even with the controversial aspects, these books are well worth reading. And they are now considered, like the Saragossa manuscript by Potocki, these books are now considered literature. And I think that the Invincible Atom, that's the third book about the final involvement of Kotikokura, I think you can search that out. There probably are several 1930s copies still available. In any case, this, My First 2,000 Years of Love, is an absolutely fascinating book. I want to explain that this trilogy of books, the 1930s 30 editions, were given to me by my master, Fred Adams, back in 1970. He gave me all three. And he and his lady, Svetlana Buterin, they had read these books, and they were quite an influence on Fred. And when I said that Salome's March Through the Ages was a manifesto of feminism, and that she was a witch, I mean, what I meant by that was this is glamorous feminism, because when witchcraft got started in this country back in 1968, 1970, when it got started, the people who really were the most influential to begin with were, of course, Robert Graves and Edward Sitch, who just passed away, and Joe Wilson, who's passed away previously. And they were all men. But very quickly, glamorous females began to enter the witchcraft community. And for quite a while, they actually dominated it. And of course, Fred Adams' lady, Svetlana, she was a very, very glamorous woman and very, very, very intelligent. And in fact, but as I've been rereading Salome, I kind of picture Svetlana Buterin as the Salome character. Now let's talk about the course of the book. Fortunately, Viereck in all these books, Viereck used the old custom of an annotated table of contents with a little abstract telling what each chapter is about. And that makes the book much easier to study. And these books, all three of these books demand study. They aren't just something that you just read through casually. You really need to study them. They really are literature. And Salome, well, let's recap Cartaphilus, Isaac Lequatum, the Wandering Jew first, so we know where we're at. The first book, which we reviewed 2 weeks ago, the first book is about Cartaphilus, the Wandering Jew, who, as I said earlier, Mary Magdalene was his lady, and she left him to go to Jesus, and so when Jesus was carrying his cross to Golgotha, Cartaphilus walked along with him, taunting him because he was going to his death. And Jesus looked at Cartaphilus and gave him a look that chilled him to the bone and said, I will be going, but you will tarry until I return. In other words, he cursed Cartaphilus with immortality. Now, so Cartaphilus lived on for 2,000 more years, all the way up into modern times, as a young man. And now, symbolically, it's pretty obvious that Cartaphilus represents the Jewish diaspora. That's pretty obvious because he leaves Jerusalem and goes all over the world, all through history. But then Salome, who Cartaphilus also knew, even though Mary Magdalene was his lady friend, he had a crush, a kind of a teenage crush on Salome, and Salome was the princess. She was the granddaughter of Herod the Great. Herod the Great, of course, was the king when Jesus was born, and he was, had been accused of launching the pogrom against Bethlehem, where they killed all the firstborn, if you remember that. Anyway, Salome, as you may recall from the legend, Salome demanded the head of John the Baptist. John the Baptist, the predecessor of Jesus, John the Baptist cursed all of Herod's family, Herodias and the mother of Salome, and Herod Antipas, the grandson of Herod, and John the Baptist cursed them all, and he cursed them as incestuous and corrupt, and Salome demanded John the Baptist's head in return for dancing before Herod Antipas, and Herod Antipas, of course, lusted after Salome, and kind of an incestuous lust, and so Salome danced before Herod Antipas, and Herod Antipas had John the Baptist's head cut off and presented to Salome on a silver platter. But before John the Baptist had his head cut off, he cursed Salome, and he said, "You are not fit for the grave." So he cursed her with immortality before he had his head cut off, and so consequently, Salome then became an immortal, and she had known Cartaphilus, Isaac Lequatum, the cobbler's son, who had since become a Roman officer. That's a little hard to believe, but this makes a good story. He'd become a Roman officer, and Salome had her first affair with him. Anyway, Salome was also driven out of Jerusalem, like Cartaphilus, and the two of them started wandering over the whole earth for the next 2,000 years, and they loved each other, but they also hated each other because Salome, from the time she was a teenager and when she had her first period, she was wanted to overcome the curse of the moon, and this was very important to her. She felt that women were completely dominated by this lunar cycle, and that they were the slaves of men because of this lunar cycle, and she thought by magic or by her willpower or magic or something, she was going to conquer the curse of the moon, and she was going to make women equal to men and perhaps even dominant. And that, by the way, was her mission. That was Salome's 2,000-year mission, was to conquer the moon and to make women equal to men or make them even dominant. Whereas Cartaphilus himself, his mission was to destroy Christianity because that was Jesus's legacy. And Cartaphilus was determined to destroy Christianity, which of course is metaphoric of the antagonism between the diaspora Jews and Christianity. Now, Salome went on from Jerusalem to visit Zenobia. Now, Zenobia was a queen of Palmyra, which was an eastern kingdom. It encompassed what is now Iran and Persia and all, and Zenobia was the queen. And the Romans had been trying for almost 100 years to conquer Palmyra, and they couldn't do it. And the last Roman that tried to conquer Palmyra was Antony, and of course Antony was financed by Cleopatra of Egypt, who was Antony's wife. But Antony couldn't conquer Palmyra. Now Zenobia was the queen of Palmyra, and so Salome went to Zenobia, and Salome thought that she could manipulate Zenobia into becoming the empress, into becoming the great queen, and that way she could achieve female domination. So she talked Zenobia into going down to Egypt, and they would unearth Cleopatra's tomb. Both Salome and Zenobia wanted they wanted to consult with the mummy of Cleopatra, and so they did that, and they unearthed the mummy of Cleopatra. Zenobia had a kind of a traumatic fit, caused Cleopatra's mummy to be destroyed. And then Salome was beginning to realize that Zenobia was not going to be the great female hope that she thought. So Salome finally left Zenobia and went on. Now, Cartaphilus, and this we covered last week, Cartaphilus went down to Africa, visited a tribe of natives in Africa. They worshipped him as a god, and he had a parrot. Cartaphilus had a parrot that rode on the camel's head as he rode into this tribe, and the parrot was screaming, "Katipa, Katipa!" And they thought that was Cartaphilus's name, and they thought Cartaphilus was God. And Cartaphilus found this ape man who was kind of the outcast of the tribe. And this ape man, Kotikokura, he was the ape man of the tribe. They ostracized him and all. And he was Kotikokura was half ape and half man. And Cartaphilus adopted him as a servant. And so Kotikokura just virtually worshipped Cartaphilus because he saved him from rebuke of the tribe, and he became Cartaphilus' servant. Well, anyway, that was all covered in the other book. Well, after Salome left Zenobia, she ventured down to Africa, and she decided that she was going to find this tribe that Cartaphilus had found, and she was going to convert this African tribe into a matriarchy. And this is why, in many ways, this book is a kind of almost a manifesto of feminism, and especially as it was developing in the neo-pagan movement back in the 60s. And I can see so much of Fred and Svetlana in this book, and what the neo-pagan movement was attempting and everything, and the growth of feminism in the neo-pagan movement, I think, was inspired in many ways by this book. But anyway, Salome wanted to create a matriarchy out of this tribe. She figured if Cartaphilus could ride in on a camel and they'd make a god out of him, if she rode in on a camel, maybe they'd make a goddess out of her, which they did. She found the tribe, and they did, but Kotikokura had returned to the tribe, and so she also adopted Kotikokura, and she was repeating, but she turned the tribe. They worshipped her as a goddess, and so she created a matriarchy, and she trained the women warriors and made one of the women her general, and she was training women warriors, and she created a matriarchy. Now, the interesting thing about this is there is a tribe in Africa, right down the South Sahara. It's where the Sahara turns into the jungle down in Africa, that actually did become a matriarchy, and I think and they still may be that tribe. And it's an artificial matriarchy. Anthropologists have studied this tribe, and they said that it wasn't always a matriarchy, but somebody at one time or another turned it into one. And so Viereck and Eldridge used that as the model for what Salome did with this tribe. But anyway, so she converted the tribe into a matriarchy, and then they started conquering other tribes, and she was going to build a feminist empire. Well, it didn't work out. The tribe, what actually happened was Cartaphilus returned. And when Cartaphilus returned, Salome's matriarchy fell apart. And so then Cartaphilus and Salome, who had this love-hate relationship between the two of them, she really did love him, and he really did love her. But they, all through these three books, they go in parallel lines, and every so often they converge. They converge, and they have a little affair, and then they separate again, and they say, well, until next time, and then they go through a few more adventures, and they get together again. And this happens all through the books. Now, Cartaphilus returns, and they overthrow the matriarchy, and Salome actually, she kind of loves Cartaphilus for having done it. It's kind of, they have a weird love-hate relationship between the two of them. And they go ahead and they decide that they're both going to leave together. They're going to leave this tribe, and they're going to leave together, and they're going to take Kotikokura with them. And so they mount their camels, and they ride back out of the jungle into the desert, and they ride across the desert. Now, what I'm going to do, because chapter 33 of the book is their journey across the desert after leaving the African tribe. And I'm going to read that chapter because I think the interaction between the two of them will give you some idea of the book and how it goes. And I'll try to do justice to it. Chapter 33. Now, this is the abstract that precedes the chapter. We ride into the desert. Kotikokura, the missing link. Man and the moon are predestined. Mates, ultimate goals, fantastic fumes. Who am I? The parting of the ways. 4 immortals. The desert undulated like an immense cradle of an infant divinity, rocked by a sleepy nurse. Kotikokura and Lakshmi rode upon one camel. And Lakshmi, by the way, was the eternal tortoise. And this is from Hindu mythology. And Salome had picked up Lakshmi when she had studied tantric yoga with the Hindus. And Lakshmi, the eternal tortoise that supports the world, had followed her. So Kotikokura and Lakshmi rode upon one camel, Cartaphilus and I upon another. The third was laden with provisions. Who is Kotikokura, Cartaphilus? I asked. I do not know. He has kept his origin secret even from me. Is he a man or a simian? Well, he is perhaps the link that binds our ancestors to us. But he is becoming more and more human. Yes, I noticed that. Well, during my absence, he has made great progress. It is a progress to become man. Cartaphilus smiled ironically. At any rate, his gait has less of the swing of the apes of the trees, and his speech is more articulate, his skin less hairy, and one shade whiter. If he lives long enough, he may become the symbol of Caucasian perfection. Cartaphilus laughed. Is he immortal? As immortal as we are? Salome asked. Time will tell whether my blood has lasting power. Your blood? It is my blood that I attribute Kotikokura's longevity and immortality. When I came to Africa for the first time and became the god Katafa, the natives, infuriated, were about to tear Kotikokura to pieces. For what crime I have never been able to discover. I saved him and took him along. In the desert I fell asleep, and suddenly I felt a sharp sting. A snake had bitten me. Instantly my arm began to swell. I thought my fate had been sealed. Jesus had forgotten to include in his anathema the descent of the creature whose subtle hiss precipitated the collapse of human felicity. Kotikokura, in that distance, laughed. The echo of his laughter rolled across the shoreless sea of sand. I do not know whether I welcomed or regretted the apparent termination of my immortality. Regretted, Salome interrupted, smiling. Well, perhaps I had little time to weigh the benefits and the losses for Kotikokura, sucked at the wound like a giant leech. My arm resumed its normal size. I was saved. I watched Kotikokura anxiously. I expected him to drop dead instantly, as Damius and other friends, into whose veins I essayed to inject my immortality. Our blood is poison to others. I, too, have discovered that. Salome sighed. Kotikokura did not die. Centuries have passed. He is still blooming. Perhaps the venom of the snake counteracted the poison of your blood, Cartaphilus. The idea struck me immediately. A great hope swelled in my heart. I would immortalize whoever I loved. I, I sprinkled a few drops of the blood mixed with the snake's venom upon the parrot's food. The bird swallowed a few seeds instantly, as if struck by the blow of a hammer. He rolled on his back, rigid as his artificial brethren in the bird stuffer's shops. Of course, Cartaphilus, after a silence, Kotikokura may have derived from some other power the gift of deathless youth. Kotikokura means the rebel in one of the dialects of the African tribes. Who knows what Messiah he enraged, what divinity he mocked? Who knows what original Jesus or John the Baptist arrested in him the double rhythm of nature, life and death? We rode in silence for some time. Did you really believe that a nation in which man was the slave and woman the master could progress? Cartaphilus asked suddenly, his tone a trifle sarcastic. Well, why not? I answered irritably. Man's rule is ordained by nature. Cartaphilus, I exclaimed, you are incorrigible. Centuries have been unable to eradicate your masculine vanity. Nor by prowess, he added smartly. I ignored that remark and continued. Woman was the first ruler. She was the mother and queen. Well, that may be. The nearer man approaches the animal, the greater the power and significance of woman. The reason you were able so quickly to change the roles of these sexes among these people is because they are only a few steps beyond their cousins, the apes. A civilized community would rebel ferociously, especially the women. That's true, Cartaphilus, I said sadly. But the day will come when woman will once again be the ruler, when she conquers the moon. The moon, he asked, looking at me quizzically. When the moon no longer draws the blood from her brain into the organs of procreation, slave of the frozen goddess, she gives birth to innumerable buds, never dusted to blossom. Her body endures every lunar month the agony of childbirth without child. Can you change the course of nature? Oh, how can you doubt that nature's course may be changed? What makes it possible for us to ride together through the desert when for centuries we should have been less than the sand and the hoofs of our camels are treading upon? If nature could not be arrested, altered, and mastered, nature is a wild and refractory stallion. But the brain of man can lasso him and mount him and drive him wherever he pleases. Well, we shall see, he said, with an ironic smile playing about his lips. We shall see, I repeated challengingly. The rocking of the camel rode me drowsy. I yawned. Cartaphilus smiled. Is the queen sleepy? Cartaphilus asked. A little. Even Salome must yield to the wielder of dreams. Kotikokura, Cartaphilus called. Kotikokura appeared instantly, as if he had flown through the air. The queen is weary, Kotikokura. Raise the tent that she may rest and sleep and forget the presence of Cartaphilus. To try to forget is a greater compliment, Cartaphilus, than to try to remember. 1,000 centuries would not suffice to forget Salome, while each hour was crowded with her memory. Even when the little priestess of the temple of the Triple Gate ministered to the joys of Cartaphilus, he looked at me astonished. Even when he almost achieved the miracle of unendurable pleasure indefinitely prolonged? Have I become history already, Salome? He asked, forgetting his surprise and his vanity. History. What is history, Cartaphilus? Does gossip please you? I was a witness at your coronation. I was the chief adept in the temple of Venus of the Triple Gate. Cartaphilus frowned. Did you expect me to wait, my hands on my lap, until Cartaphilus, the much beloved, came to propose marriage to me? Must I not find my soul even in you, in the great baptism of the senses? Have you forgotten the words of Apollonius, Cartaphilus? Have you forgotten the tablet which you placed at the feet of the statue in the temple of Diana? Salome has honored me too much by following in my footsteps. Conceit and vanity, I exclaimed. Followed you? Did I have to follow you? Could I not guess where you were? How? Do you still believe it is impossible for a woman to reason? Will you never understand that woman's brain may work as subtly and even more so than man's? It is difficult to overcome an idea for hundreds of generations, Salome, an idea transmitted to us with the milk of our mothers. Shall be my mission, to combat this idea, to combat the male and his arrogance. I shall not fight you, Salome. Yes, always. Whether you will it or not, man and woman are equal antagonists. Even in love, they bear each other, and each other is a battle. Every gesture of their embrace is a war. But man's victory is short-lived, and the booty is woman's, I said triumphantly. Kotikokura mentioned to us that the tent was ready. A little further off, he raised another for himself and Lakshmi. We sat, our legs underneath us, upon the leopard skin, and I filled 2 small ivory pipes and offered Cartaphilus one. The air was pervaded with delicate incense. Not all the papyrus in the world, not all the silk, not all the marble could hold half of the dialogues between Salome and myself that reverberated in my brain. In the 100th of years and lands, Cartaphilus said, watching the smoke curl from his pipe. I have no doubt that always Cartaphilus emerged triumphant. I smiled. Generally, he admitted, laughing a little, if you only knew how I loved you, hated you, and how often you were a demon, and how often an angel, how often my sword pierced your heart, how often my breath revived you. No priest, drunken with his God, ever invoked hymns more passionate than I. No prophet, scorning his generations, uttered such maledictions. He stopped and, taking my hand, placed it against his chest. By now, as I hold your hand, smoother, softer than the throat of a young pigeon, now I remember nothing, save 3 words: I love you. He pulled at his pipe. I have lived centuries, Salome, and yet be unable to say more than an adolescent in the presence of his first love. Centuries. What are centuries, Cartaphilus? We who have lived them know that the more things change, the more they remain unaltered. How can it be otherwise, since the brain cannot break the bondage of the skull, and the heart beats against the chest with the same eternal rhythm? What is different since I was the Princess Salome and you the captain of the Royal Guard? Centuries have changed their contours, and kings and gods their names. Languages have broken into dialects or are no longer remembered at all. The roofs of houses have altered their forms, and the dress of women its shape, but still spring follows winter, sun scorches, the rain floods, and still people are born, live a while and die. And since still the flower quivers under the fluttering wing of the tree and the butterfly, and still the old rhythm of turgence and demutience reverberates itself. Still the wild beast of the forest seeks his mate and kills his rival. Still, I love you is the formula of passion. And still, Salome is the mirage, the Fata Morgana that Cartaphilus pursues beyond the desert and the horizon. I made believe I did not hear him. Ah, if man lived for centuries, perhaps then. But no, man, as he is constituted, must remain forever the slave of the elements. If we should only create a new being, Cartaphilus, a being fashioned for joy and from wisdom, if you and I, Salome, could have offspring, no, even if the life force which gives us our strange longevity, demanding sterility in return, could be mastered, and it would be dangerous to bring forth progeny. Our children must be titans, gods, monsters of thought and passion, who, finding the earth ridiculous and insufficient, would crush it and hurl it against infinity. The moon turns slowly in a wide circle over our heads. The stars mass themselves in great clusters. The smoke of our pipes curled about our faces. Why were you so cruel to me, Salome, when you were Princess of Judea? Do you remember that still? The venom still poisons my heart. I was not cruel, Cartaphilus. I merely resented your air of invincible masculinity, because it was my vengeance. Vengeance? Some years previously, a haughty youth, bathing in the Sea of Galilee behind our palace, vaunted his masculinity before his friend John and ridiculed women, especially Salome. He said she was scrawny, homely, and undesirable. He mocked her mother and her family. Well, I used to bathe in the river behind your palace with my friend John. That's true. And he became a Christian saint, and dabbled with letters. John is the author of one of those Gospels and of the Apocalypse, a collection of predictions and maledictions so exotic, too exotic for my comprehension. He was the beloved disciple of the Nazarene, but once Cartaphilus blushed charmingly, he loved me. Mary also appeared in your amorous daydreams. I love both John and Mary. They deserted me to join Jesus, and ever since I have been seeking the double blossom of passion, John and Mary in one. But how did it happen? But how did it happen that you overheard my conversations with John? Well, I was hiding in the bushes with my cousin Agrippina. You did not turn away, and with maidenly modesty, but you watched us, Cartaphilus remarked with a mock intonation, to hide his own confusion. You strutted about like a peacock in all the glory of transcendent youth. Cartaphilus smiled. I looked, then things strange overwhelmed me, and I became a woman. When Cartaphilus, captain of the royal guard, appeared in the palace of Pilate, I regretted at once the youth whose image had buried itself in my mind like a thorn, like a flower. He had remained as handsome, as vain, and as haughty. I hated him, and I loved him, as of yore. Did you love me, Salome? He asked, looking into my eyes. I loved you, and for that reason, I would not give myself to you. And for that reason, I shall not give myself to you until your mockery of woman shall no longer hold the semblance of truth. Salome, Salome. I refilled the pipes. I wonder what they were smoking. Centuries have obliterated the silly words of my youth. Come with me. Be with me forever, Salome. Let us not grow sentimental, Cartaphilus. We are no longer precisely children, I laughed. Salome, we are not logical companions. The predestined mates, bound by one race and one fate forever. We are two parallel lines drawn very closely to each other, so very closely that no third line, however thin, can intrude between us. Will the two parallel lines ever meet? Yes, in infinity. Never before, perhaps. Our silence was long and uninterrupted. Then gradually we began to speak of our lives and experiences. We recalled Apollonius and Longinus and Zenobia and Pilate and Marcus Aurelius. We laughed and sighed over the multitudinous incidents. We crowned the history of Arabia and Judea and Persia and Palmyra and China and Rome into small fistfuls of events. In Persia, Salome, you have become the mother of Zoroaster, who was born a virgin. In Arabia, you are the Princess Scheherazade, who embroiders 1,001 nights. Among the barbarians, you are the divinity of love. In China and India, you are the theme of the poets, philosophers, and philologists. You are the vision of perfection, appearing each century in the gardens of the empire. You are the symbol of immortality. You are the golden tortoise supporting the world. And you, Cartaphilus, are a god and a devil and an antichrist, prophet of good and evil, Priapus, Pan, Bacchus, and Mammon, history. We are much more, Cartaphilus. We are legend. Together, what a marvelous legend we should make. Salome, together we might become the symbol of conjugal felicity and monotony. When we have crossed the desert, shall my solitary wanderings begin anew, Salome? I laughed heartily. Solitary, Cartaphilus, with the vastest harems, solitary in the courts of emperors and kings, and in the arms of empresses and queens, solitary if Salome is not with me. You forget your search for perfection, Cartaphilus. Salome is perfection. Not until she has achieved freedom. His pipe fell out of his hand. His words came slowly and vaguely. Give me your lips, Salome, he whispered. Oh, not yet, Cartaphilus. 1,000 women, 1,000 years of love, can they compare to your lips, Salome? He stretched out. Your lips, Salome. I dropped my pipe. He closed his eyes. Your lips, Salome. I pressed my lips upon his and stretched out next to him. Mary Magdalene, your lips. Salome, I whispered, taunting. John, Salome, I love you. Whom do you love? I love you. Who am I? You are she who has returned, then the uttermost rim of time, before the soul is split asunder into male and female. You are she, my lover. The stars, the rainfall of silver and gold, the smoke of our pipes wound itself around our naked limbs. Lakshmi, Lakshmi, Lakshmi. Kotikokura ran in all directions at the same time. What has happened, Kotikokura? I asked. Lakshmi, Lakshmi, he muttered, searching the sand. Don't worry, Kotikokura, I counseled him. When all our efforts at finding the tortoise proved futile, she has probably returned to be the high priestess of Salama, who carries 1,000 stars upon his beak will be the high priest of Cartaphilus. Thus, at last, the two divinities shall merge into one, and the prophecy is fulfilled. Divinities shall merge into one, the prophecy is fulfilled. Cartaphilus is God, Kotikokura grumbled. Cartaphilus, his brows knit, was thinking in silence. I placed my hand upon his shoulder. Are not all things relative, Cartaphilus? Dream and waking, memory and brightness, possession and desire. Were you mine, Salome? I smiled. I had a vision of incomparable beauty. Was it merely a dream? Look, Cartaphilus, I see houses in the distance. We must part. Tell me, he insisted. Even the patient camels are becoming restless, Cartaphilus. Take their long knotted legs learn for locomotion. Come. Salome, tell me, he begged. Vision, reality. We shall undo the subtle weaving. Come. We watch the gate of the town. Come with me, Salome, Cartaphilus insisted. Let us both fight the Nazarene and his religion of superstition and slavery. I smiled. Fight religion? We gods should be more class conscious. The world has become uninhabitable. Logic and reason and truth are banished, and fanaticism is rampant. Cartaphilus is a child playing games. I must crush the Nazarene. Shall Cartaphilus replace him, or Salome? Cartaphilus is God, Kotikokura said with finality. You at least have one true worshiper, Cartaphilus. Who knows if the Nazarene is so fortunate? The religion of the Nazarene must perish, and the moon must be conquered. We looked at each other in silence for a long time. Farewell, Cartaphilus. He embraced me. It was not a dream, he exclaimed, perhaps. Farewell, Kotikokura. He kissed my hand. Farewell. That concludes chapter 33. And that, I think, the reason why I selected that chapter is because I think that chapter, you get to know the two of them and understand their love-hate relationship better than any chapter in the book. Now, we go on from here, and she goes on through several adventures, and finally, most significantly, she visits a nunnery and becomes very fond of this young nun, this young woman who is a nun, and she gets this young nun, Joan, and grooms the young nun to be a male, and has her disguised as a male, and Salome manipulates the young nun into the priesthood, the Roman Catholic priesthood, and she has decided, whereas Cartaphilus wants to destroy Christianity, Salome wants to take it over, and her method is to pass Joan off as a male and make a cardinal out of her, and then get her, and then have her become a pope. And she does this. She succeeds in doing this, and she turns her protege, Joan, into Pope John VIII. And Pope John VIII, then there's a great drought. A great drought descends on Italy, and the farms are all the crops are drying up, and the people are praying for rain, and yet, unfortunately, Pope John is pregnant. But Pope Joan takes her papal job very seriously. She wants to be a mother, but she's been living a double life, and so she wants to go out and bless the fields with holy water, and pray for rain. And Salome keeps telling her, you're too, your condition is too delicate. You're just about to have a child. You dare not do this. But Pope Joan insists, the people need me, and we need rain. So Salome finally goes out with her and with several cardinals from the Vatican, and they go out into the fields, and Pope John sprinkles the fields with holy water and prays for rain, and the thunder comes and the rain comes, but unfortunately Pope John falls down and gives birth to the baby right there in the field. And then the cardinals are so shocked that they immediately want to burn her at the stake. And Salome tries to proclaim that she is the Pope and that women will now rule the church. And but that doesn't work. Joan and her baby are both killed, and Salome escapes. Salome manages to escape. And then she goes on, and then finally goes to France. And she has, like Cartaphilus before her, she has a go-round with Joan of Arc and Giles de Retz, the infamous Bluebeard. And we covered that in the first book in my first 2,000 years. Joan of Arc, the famous French lady mystic who led the French army against the British. Joan of Arc, actually, the British captured her, tried her for witchcraft, and burned her at the stake. And but Joan of Arc's general, Giles de Retz, was a serial killer and a satanic alchemist, and at least he became one after Joan was burned at the stake. And according to Viereck and Eldridge, to their version of the story, Giles de Retz really loved Joan of Arc, and Joan of Arc really was a witch. So Salome gets involved with both of them. And anyway, Salome becomes a witch and goes to France, and she starts several satanic covens in France. And not only does she do that, but then she goes to England and she has a go round with Queen Elizabeth. Like so many other people, Viereck and Eldridge suspected that Queen Elizabeth was either a transvestite or transgender, and so we deal with that. Finally, she links up with Cartaphilus again in the modern world. Anyway, this book, as I said, is really, I hope I did justice to it in the reading, but this book is really literature. Like I said, some fictional works have become literature. One of them is the Saragossa manuscript by Jan Potocki. That's now considered literature, and I think these books will, even though they're controversial, very controversial. And as I say, the third book, The Invincible Atom, which is about Kotikokura, that one is very, very, very controversial because Kotikokura is obviously an African, and he's said to be the missing link. And you recall Cartaphilus's remark about, well, if he keeps getting whiter and more hairless, eventually he's going to be a Caucasian. So you can see that these books are controversial, and yet they're very, very good, and they're very worth reading, and I can highly recommend them. And as I say, both my first 2,000 years and Salome, my first 2,000 years of love, are both back in print, and I strongly recommend them. Next week we'll be back with another Hermetic mystery. And I hope you enjoyed this evening. And until then, good magic.